This episode of Troxel is supported by AVAIL. AVAIL helps AECO firms better manage, organize, and navigate information faster. This episode of Troxel is supported by Confluence, a small conference event for AEC professionals and technology providers to discuss industry trends and ideas together. It's put on by the fine folks at AVAIL. Learn more about the upcoming invite-only event happening in the spring of 2024 in New York City during this episode. This episode of the Troxel Podcast is made possible with support from ArchIT. Are you tired of standard IT services that miss the mark? Choose ArchIT for specialized, proactive IT management, BIM support, and robust data security tailored for architects. Whether you're a team of 10 or a growing firm of 50 plus, ArchIT understands the architecture industry and will empower your unique creative vision to enable you to do your best work. Embrace a technology team that enhances, not hinders, your design process. Visit getarchit.com for your free IT assessment and start transforming your firm and your tech experience today. That's getarchit.com. Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. Before we dive into today's episode, I have a small but significant request. If you enjoy these episodes, could you please subscribe to the Troxel Podcast on both YouTube and in the audio podcast form on your preferred platform? Your subscription is incredibly valuable in supporting my efforts. Producing this podcast demands significant resources and time, and I genuinely hope you find it enriching for yourself and valuable for the AEC industry. Here's why it matters. Subscriber numbers directly influence my ability to attract better sponsors and high-profile guests. Both of these matter. A larger audience makes this podcast more appealing to them, which in turn enriches your listening experience. So, if you haven't subscribed, I encourage you to do so. It's free and a great way to support Troxel. And remember, not just YouTube, but please subscribe also in your favorite audio podcast. It's equally important. Besides subscribing, there are two more ways you can support the show. You can now make a one-time donation at trxl.co/donate or consider becoming a member. To learn more about the perks of membership and to join, simply click on one of the subscribe buttons on trxl.co and choose that option. Your support is crucial for the sustainability of the show, and I deeply appreciate it. Okay, in this episode, I welcome Phil Reed. Phil is the CEO and co-founder of Reed Thomas, a global BIM and VDC consulting group and go-to-market startup advisor. In 2020, Reed Thomas founded the AEC Leadership Retreat, an annual event that occurs in the fall focused on developing good leadership skills for people in the high-stress, low-control AEC industry. And I'll have more to say about this in the near future, but now I want to bring your attention to a couple of links that I've put in the show notes for Phil's upcoming AEC Acoustics Retreat, which is a new addition to that fall series and happening at the end of April. So for now, I'll just say that I'm planning on being there, and I hope you'll consider it as well. Again, check out the links for more information and for registration in the show notes to find out more about the AEC Acoustics event. For this one, Phil and I met up in the Denver airport. I flew in from Oregon and he flew in from North Carolina to meet in the middle and have an in-person conversation for this episode, which was really fantastic. Because of where we ended up finding a place to record, there's no video for this one, but you'll hear more about that once we get into the conversation. I've also decided to split this up into two parts, one for this week and another next week, because that way I think there's a better chance you'll get the whole picture. It's literally peppered with little golden advice nuggets throughout and has become one of my favorite episodes I've ever done. In part one, we discuss Phil's personal journey from seminary to architecture, his experiences in AEC tech over the last few decades, the value of an architect, advice for students interested in pursuing architecture, advice for those thinking about starting their own firms, investing in tools versus buying toys, the importance of systematizing processes, a look ahead at the future of the industry, and more. I do regret not having the wherewithal to get a picture of us while we were in our very public recording studio when we were in Denver, but I'm confident there will be more chances in the near future to memorialize the value of in-person communication like this episode. So until then, please enjoy this audio recording of my wide-ranging conversation with Phil Reed.
Cheers.
Cheers. Why don't you explain where we are?
We're at the United Lounge, East Concourse B, 3rd level, Denver, Colorado.
And you know this place like the back of your hand, it sounds like. Yeah. Like with that kind of an I'm like, we're in the United Lounge. And no, you took it 3 levels deeper than that. So you fly a lot.
You get to know where places are and areas of refuge.
Right. Yeah. As much as refuge as this actually is.
Yeah, we couldn't get it. They used to have meeting spaces in the lounge. And then the new design got rid of all of the conference rooms because businesses would fly in executives and they would bar the conference room, but now that's gone.
Yeah. They would monopolize it, so it wasn't.
The alternative was Weston at the end of the airport. You could walk to it from here, but they wanted like $1,000 a day to get a conference room. And I said, no, we'll have to do that. We'll just spend $300 and get a regular room. And then I thought, well, maybe the United Lounge, and then we'll get food too.
Yeah, great. I love it. And so we've made an investment to get here, right?
We have, of course.
Yeah. I mean, to do it in person, I saw you at AU in the booth and
at the Enscape booth.
And you were generous to say, let's do it in person because the conversations are so much better.
They are. And you can talk about other things outside of the conversation, outside of the formality. Yeah, it's the, I think conversations can be too transactional. Mm-hmm. And the value of just getting to know someone, catching up. How have you been over the last 3 years? We haven't seen each other. I think it shows some earnestness and it shows attention to detail.
So we've met in the middle. I'm on the West Coast. You're on the East Coast.
Yeah, I didn't want to go all the way to Medford. I thought I can fly out and you can do the same.
And it's such a small airport that it costs a lot of money to get in and out of there. Right. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because Medford is just, I don't know, there's 5 gates, 6 gates. It's very small. And so not a lot of airlines fly direct there anyway. So,
well, so I was going to fly out and I looked at it and I thought, well, it's expensive, but it's direct to Denver. Mm-hmm. Because it was like Charlotte, Denver, Medford. And I thought, oh, we'll maybe just each meet halfway. And then I wouldn't spend a hotel. I'll just fly back to Charlotte tonight. You'll fly back to Oregon.
So we're spending the day in the airport in the United Lounge. Yeah. And flying in and flying out. So if anybody's wondering why we're hearing the background noise.
It's not artificial. It's not a backtrack.
Yeah, this is not a backing track. A conversational backing track of room noise.
Right.
So
it's authentic lounge noise.
So we had breakfast together here at the lounge, which was nice. And we had a chance to actually get to know each other a little bit before we
talk about other
hit
stuff.
Record. And
then you threatened me because you said, "Oh, we have to talk about this again."
I said, "Yeah, you're gonna have to repeat all of this because it was all. This is what the podcast is. It's like people get to be in the room with the people having the conversation. I mean, that's why I do this, and I mean, I think it's that important because in order to facilitate real conversation, you have to allow digressions to happen because that's how you get to know people."
Right. Yeah.
It's not just talking points. It's not just the agenda, the outline. It's the other stuff. It's the in-between stuff that really, I think,
the diversions
matters.
are important. Yeah. The context is important. The reasons are important. So it's not just a list of questions. Answer 10 questions and thank you.
Yeah, I never send out questions ahead of time. I rarely have it even structured that way. So if somebody asks for
I don't know what we're going to talk about.
I couldn't. Yeah.
It's going to surprise me.
Do you know the next word that's going to come out of your mouth?
No. Yes.
We don't.
No.
I think that's super interesting. We don't even know.
And so that's an authentic conversation, I think, for both of us, because we'll both have input based on what we chatted about over breakfast. We'll both have input. And then that allows it to be more than just a transactional meeting. It allows it to be a connection, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yep.
So maybe you can give a little bit of your backstory for people who don't know it, because I think you establishing kind of your trajectory throughout the AEC technology industry is important just to establish this, because I don't think we're going to talk about that too much today. Actually, I think we're going to talk about the softer stuff that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
talked about before.
Soft
But
skills.
I love the idea of just people telling their story to kind of kick it off.
So as quickly as possible, it was entirely accidental. I went to seminary for 4.5 years and got out, started picking up any odd job. I worked in radio broadcasting, television for a while because I studied communications and literature, and then taught math at a school for troubled youth, and realized I can't change the world. I'm just one person. I got to get serious about career kind of mindset. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. Went back to the same small town. Music and music was a first passion, but I just couldn't figure out how to pay bills with other musicians. And I went back to the same small town, started picking up odd jobs as much as possible, and took a class at a local technical college just out of curiosity, this thing called CAD. And
When was this?
loved it. Oh, 98, 99.
Okay.
And yeah, the small technical college had this CAD program. Ended up meeting someone. I took a job at a summer camp so I could fish in their private lake, and ended up meeting who's now my wife, 30 years. We went to New Zealand, got married. I started working as a commercial artist because I had a artistic background. I mean, it wasn't all just computers and technology. And then came back to the U.S. to study architecture on the condition that I wouldn't borrow money to do it. And
So you set that condition with yourself, with your wife?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, it's like I can't go back to
You
school.
set some ground rules around.
And I couldn't decide, Evan. It was. I kind of narrowed it down. I wanted something that I could do anywhere in the world for my entire life. Like that was part of what I wanted to choose.
I think architecture is interesting there because, like, you definitely could just sit at a desk for the rest of your life. Like people do. They there's
could.
the joke in the field is like you die at the drafting table. Like the architects don't even
Well,
retire.
I thought anything. I narrowed it down to law, medicine, or architecture.
So all professional.
Well, something you do your whole life. Like it's
Yeah.
not going to physically break you.
Yeah, right.
But and intellectually, it'll always be curious.
Yeah.
And I sort of thought, okay, medicine, you can't really do that anywhere because you'll have to get certified if you want to, go somewhere else in the world. So I narrowed it down to law or architecture. And my roommate at seminary went and studied law, and I was back in the U.S. for a wedding, and we were catching up. And I was studying for my, the METCAT or the LSAT. And I was also looking at architecture schools. And Dave was doing great. He'd started families, buying a house. And I said, I've narrowed it down to architecture or law. What do you think? And he said, do architecture. And I was surprised. Like,
Yeah.
he had all the accoutrements.
If you
of
would have asked an
success.
architect, they would have said do law.
Do law.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, I get up in the morning and I look at myself in the mirror and I think I'm going to have to ruin someone's life to make a living.
Oh, wow.
And,
Yeah, architecture's not like that.
Yeah. So he said actually, and his dad was a contractor, and we worked together in the summer in the construction space. And he said, I wish I'd gone into architecture because I could make things instead of tear things apart. So with that, I thought, okay, well, that makes it simple. I'll just do architecture. It's noble. I applied and got accepted to Taliesin with just my
East
technical.
or west?
Well, they transition back and forth. And I was so excited. This would have probably been 93-ish.
What was that application process like? Like, what did you have to supply
it was
to
a
them?
phone call. It was a faxed application. It was pay money. It was show them evidence of earnestness in terms of technical ability.
Yeah.
And I had a portfolio from school and also some hand designs that I'd done. And I was so excited, coming out of seminary, you're kind of in one religious cult and you're going into another religious cult. So that was
Everything's
okay.
a cult. Yeah,
right,
by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wasn't worried about that. And I thought it'd be interesting to be part of that historic context. And then it turned out at that time, so this was in the early 90s, if you were married, your spouse has to attend. And you couldn't work outside of the fellowship. So it was effectively an apprenticeship for 7 years.
Right.
And then at that time, it wasn't accredited.
Yeah.
So Justine didn't really want to go. I didn't want to borrow money to do it.
Yeah.
It was $7,500 per person per year. So I thought, well, still I'm borrowing $15,000 for 7 years.
Yeah.
And you can't work outside the fellowship. So I was really just heartbroken. and realized I
That
couldn't do
sounds
it.
untenable, right? Because if you have to dedicate yourself to that, you basically have to have all that money up front.
There's no other way to do it. So I just finally had to just rescind my application. I was just really heartbroken, and ended up looking at a map and going, okay, I've got family in Asheville and family in Raleigh and family in Fayetteville. Where is an architecture school near that? And it just turned out that there was a University of North Carolina at Charlotte had an architecture program. And I wasn't particularly passionate about going there, but it turned out to be a really serendipitous move. It was a great program. I keep in touch with students that I graduated with. It's always stressful being I was probably 28, 29 when I started school there. And I'd already had this prior degree. I'd already worked in, when I first came back to the US to start to pursue going to architecture school, I was working at an engineering firm. And because of a technical background, I couldn't design. Well, I could do, we were a civil engineering firm, so I could design, but I wasn't doing severe calculations or accountable for any of that. I was really transitioning. I was transitioning someone who'd drawn something by hand, usually sketched by hand that needed to be in the computer. So I realized I wouldn't have to borrow money to go to UNCC. I had a prior degree, so I only had to take studios. And so that was in the fall of '94 I started working for an engineering firm in Charlotte. And by the end of the third year, they started a master's program. So I jumped into that. It was a 2 years master's program if you had a prior degree. So I wrapped up my 4-year degree while kicking off my master's degree the same year. And then in 5 years, I had a master's degree and an undergraduate degree. And so that's where it just was, it was accidental, but I think if for anyone who's in high school that wants to study architecture, the big lesson is I would probably tell them not to study architecture as an undergraduate. Go get a technical background and work while you're in school so you have enough time. You have enough time for friends, but not too much time. You have enough time to drink, but not too much time. But get an undergrad, like in high schools now, you can start early college and get a technical degree,
right,
and start picking up your design tools and learning how to use them and solve problems early, and then study something else at college as an undergraduate. Any STEM related class, like computer science, psychology, engineering, and then go back and get your master's degree in architecture. And work while you're in school. Work as much as you can, work part-time during the year, full-time during the summer, get a job at a firm, and learn how to solve problems.
This episode is made possible with support from AVAIL. In a world where precision meets creativity, where every line drawn holds the power to innovate, people like you are shaping the future. But let's face it, in the realm of design, the unknown is your least favorite companion. You've been stranded on the island of inefficient software, lost in the fog of endless searching for the right content. It's time to embark on a new journey, a journey to clarity, efficiency, and design excellence. It's time to get off that island and away from the unknown. Introducing AVAIL, the beacon in your design odyssey. Say goodbye to the daunting 10 to 20 minutes wasted per search, the costly interruptions in your creative flow. With AVAIL, your team will zip through content discovery, focusing more on designing and less on searching. Imagine a world where you can stop constantly fighting the costly fires caused by pulling content from past projects, building from scratch, or relying on personal libraries. AVAIL isn't just a tool, it's a revolution for AECO firms. Organize, manage, and navigate your project information with a leader that's proven in reliability, relatability, and success. Join the ranks of the top AECO firms who've already chosen AVAIL. In just 30 days, you could deploy AVAIL and witness a dramatic reduction in costly design errors. Whether it's your first CMS or you're considering a switch, there's someone you should meet. Will Rouse, your guide to all things AVAIL. Schedule an appointment and explore AVAIL's capabilities, onboarding programs, and professional services. Don't let your designs be clouded by inefficiency. Clear skies are just a click away. Go to getavail.com/stranded and book a meeting with Will to start your AVAIL journey today. AVAIL, where your best design is just a search away. My thanks to AVAIL for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. Do you feel like you have that advice now because of the time period that we're living in with computing? Like, it seems to me right now with computer science especially, that's got to be an enormous amount of people going through that.
I think it gives you a well-rounded...
You could do software for so many, it's like it's kind of a foundational thing now. Whereas when I was in school, it wasn't. This was like I went straight out of high school into
there was not much
architecture.
software in the 80s when I was first in college, right? It wouldn't have been a thing.
Right.
I think the importance is as soon as you can start the rigor of learning how to solve problems and learning from experienced people as a young person. I don't know that you're learning from experienced people in college.
Yeah.
And so working part-time for a company that has to solve problems and be polite to the client, and particularly with small firms, you have to do everything.
Yeah.
If you're a young person with a technical background in SketchUp and Revit and polite, you're going to get pulled into meetings with the customer. The owner's going to say, hey, I need you to open up that project in Enscape and come in here and drive the model.
Yeah.
So you're going to be part of those conversations.
And you're going to get to absorb what happens in that room and learn so much faster being in that situation.
Yeah, and university has I think there's a couple of challenges. We're at an inflection point with how people learn to do things. At a time when information is racing to the cost of zero, university has become irrecoverably expensive in terms of student loans.
Right.
So if you can protect yourself by not borrowing money whilst you go to school, you'll graduate with probably 4 or 5 years of real world experience, and then pick your grad school. If you're from a disadvantaged background, that kind of portfolio is going to pay you in terms of scholarship. And now you'll get a great graduate diploma from a top-notch school. But for an undergraduate, I would just get a technical background while you're in high school or before you go to college, and then start working for a firm and get the experience of not being an employee, but learning how to think as an employer. Because everybody gets to do everything at a small firm.
Yeah. The whole idea of architecture school is learning how to think about problem solving on the macro level. Like
not usually in particular, it's,
right.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like it's kind of like weeding out non-problem solvers and problem solvers. People who are up for the challenge versus people who are looking to get through something.
Well, there's the lack of constraints at university creates an artificial approach to design problem solving.
True, yeah.
And I think when you have a client with a budget and a problem that you have to solve, you're trying to do it as elegantly as possible within budget and to be earnest. And I don't think that cheapens the design.
Yeah.
I think you come up with really interesting solutions. Whereas, early in architecture school, I would say the first 3 years is kind of like, you learn to make blobs, but you don't really learn how to make decisions. And your client doesn't have a budget. They're your professor and you're paying them.
Yeah.
So that part of it is kind of an unofficial it's an artificial construct. So if you're in that world where you're learning how to solve problems, I don't know that it's not necessarily going to be high design. I think a lot of small firms are actually doing really earnest, really good work. And you might not have 8 hours a day to work for a firm while you're in school. You might only have 4 hours a day, but you're gonna be there at critical moments, and you'll learn a lot. When I was going to UNCC, I was working full time, and I look back now because it was parts of it were a blur. I would get up at 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m. I would leave. I would drive to South Park from the university area, start work at 4 a.m., eat lunch at 9 a.m., and then leave at noon to go home, eat breakfast at 9 a.m., eat lunch, have a nap, and then be in studio by 2 o'clock. And I would start to fantasize about sleep by Tuesday or Wednesday. I just can't wait till I can sleep. But the advantage of that and not borrowing money was such that when Revit came out around the spring of 2000, I was able to take a chance buying a computer, learning how to use that tool. So by the spring of 2001, I was working for Revit Technology. And had I borrowed money, I don't think I could have taken that chance because you don't know what's going to happen. And so having the freedom, when an opportunity comes along, you don't want to have to go off and pack your bags. You want to have the bags already packed. You want to be ready to go. And I was still anxious about whether or not Revit would work out, because I was full of hope and promise, but we were fighting an uphill battle. There were a lot of technology incumbents. But the freedom of not borrowing money means you can say yes to things that are important and no to things that aren't. a lot of us, I think, we go to architecture school to learn how to become an employee, but not how to
Right.
become an employer.
Yeah.
Professional practice is typically your fifth year course, right?
Or it's entrepreneurism is not really. I completely agree. It's like you're going to go work at a big firm, and you're going to fill these jobs. And I think there's already a misalignment between what their stated goal is to teach you to become a designer, when the percentage of jobs in firms with that title are
There's
very
people in front of you,
small,
and there's few of them.
and the ladder already has 4 or 5 people on it ahead of you, right? And they're stomping at your hands from above. So there's a big misalignment with the profession and academia, and I don't see a solution.
I had one professor in 5 years. We had to track our time, and he would say, "This is a 4-hour task. This is an 8-hour
wow.
task," and
That never came across
that was
our radar.
fantastic
I
because
bet.
you can usually, if you have a limited amount of time, you don't have time to put it off, and then you're up in studio all night. You're like, no, I have to do it right now, and I'm going to get to a good stopping point, and then we would have a discussion, and that was a good lesson. It's like you need to keep track of your time so your time doesn't become cheap. And I don't know that architecture school, maybe they've changed in the last 20 years where they're starting to, I don't want to say respect time, but sort of give people the mindset that you can't work 24 hours a day.
I think that's changed more
studios,
recently. Yeah.
working 40 hours a weekend over studio
Yeah.
is probably not healthy.
Yeah.
Like I would watch students have mental breakdowns and smash their models and stuff like that.
Light them on fire in the courtyard. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you're learning how to solve problems, including being polite to a customer, that's like a critical part of being successful as a business person. You have to show up. You have to be polite. You have to give them a good experience. You have to show earnestness. And I don't know that that's directly related to design itself. So so architecture school graduated in the spring of 99 and went to work in the architectural space, saw Revit in the spring of 2000 and was working for Revit technology by February 2001.
How did that happen right there? So is it that you bought the machine, you learned the software, and they saw that motivation in you?
No, well, I wanted to use it at the firm that I was at, and I can distinctly remember one of the owners saying, well, if we learn how to use this, then we'll have to use this and AutoCAD and MicroStation. And I realized he didn't understand the value of it. I'd committed myself to using the Macintosh platform while I was at university. But when I saw Revit in the spring of 2000, I went out and bought what was a cheap workstation at the time called an E-machine and put Revit 1.0 on it and started going through the little booklet that came with the CD. And I was starting, there were a lot of limitations in the software, obviously, at the time at that release. There was no site tool. Well, there might have been a site tool, but it was limited in certain ways. So I started modeling sites as in-place geometries. And Revit had this, they would send out these periodic marketing emails with renderings, and my images were in there and no one had asked permission. Or there was a guy that would call me and go, hey, this rendering that you sent, how did you do that? Because I ended up taking a project that we had done at this architecture firm all the way through documentation, then it never got built. And I took a copy of that home and started recreating it in Revit. And by doing so, discovered every edge condition that Revit couldn't handle. And then I had to start figuring out how to do it. So the first thing you do is say, well, there's a room tag or a wall tag. So now you're opening up a family editor and trying to create that artifact. Before I bought Revit, I was actually looking at ArchIT, and the local reseller, I had my pen out with the top of it clicked and the checkbook. I was going to write a check for ArchIT plus the stair tool. I was like $7,500. And Mark said, hey, look, before you write this check, I just want to let you know we've kind of become friends. And there's this tool called Revit, and they've integrated the documentation. You might want to look at that before you make this purchase. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll see what I was blown away when I Revit 1.0, because for me, the conceptual pieces that you really had to have were the main building components, the content inside the building, and you had to be able to create instructions, and you had to be able to organize that in a way where as much as possible it was all in one place. And so at that time, Autodesk had ADT, MicroStation had Triforma J, ArchIT had their tool, but all of them seemed to require exporting to documentation. And we were using MicroStation at that time, and the challenge was you would get the model to a point, you batch export to document, and the batch export wasn't fast. It might take an overnight. And then you'd have a meeting with a customer, you'd have red lines, and you'd start tweaking things in the documentation because the deadline might be that week and you don't have enough hours to keep exporting when changes occur. And so we'd submit for the deadline, and then we'd have to make this kind of existential decision of, do we go back to the model to pick up these red lines after the deadline's passed, or do we just start updating the drawings? And so it was kind of this schizophrenia of, I'm using a model, it has all these advantages, but then I have to decouple from it because of the workflow. So what I saw with Revit, like early on, I could put something on a sheet, open up the view on the sheet, move something, delete something, it would come out of a schedule, it would come out of a section if you deleted it from a plan. And I thought, well, that's a big fundamental. Someone's finally nutted that out. So Revit, at that time, they were advertising for a lot of positions, and they had a technical expert. They wanted like a support person for the Mid-Atlantic, and I went up to interview. I interviewed with Steve Burry and I think Rob Macarini and Dave Heaton. And after all the interviews for this position, they offered me that job, and I said, well, really, I don't want this job. But I tell you what, I think you should do. I said, the thing is, this job is like helping customers after things are broken. Why don't you have a team of people that go and work with a customer to kick projects off to keep the problems from occurring? And they said, well, actually, we're going to create a team to do that. We're going to create a consulting group. It'll probably mean a lot of travel, but you'll go in the office, you'll kick the project off with a customer, and you'll work hands-on. Oh, it's like, that sounds amazing. And that's what I did. I started February 1st, 2001.
Wow.
And every February 1st, I still call Dave Heaton, say thanks. And to this day, we still have breakfast once a month online. Because he's up in Maine, retired. And we just talk about anything and nothing. It's good.
That's cool.
He taught me a lot besides just technology. It was great. And so that was a kickoff to working at Revit. And then within a year, I guess we were acquired April of 2002, working for Autodesk. And that's a rocket ship, right? Because they've got people everywhere in the world making sure that their solutions are being sold and supported. And
I just recently had Marty Rosmaneth on the podcast, and he told a little bit of the Revit Technology Corporation, Charles River to Revit Technology to Autodesk. And it is pretty fascinating to see the paths cross from various perspectives. And I mean, back then when I graduated with my bachelor's degree in '97, I was using MicroStation also. And that process that you explained.
Triforma? Was that out?
We used a little bit of that. It was MicroStation J, MicroStation 95. I think J came after 95, but it was available on the Mac back then.
That's right.
And there was another version of AutoCAD that actually ran on the Mac until it didn't anymore, right? But I just think it's interesting when you talked about that process of kind of that fundamental decision that you have to make of where you're going to make the changes. And we all struggled with that. It's like, do I make them in the drawings? Do I go back to do I do it on the sheets? Do I do it in the model? This was just the digital version of changing the dimension on the hand-drawn plans rather than redrawing it. And so it was still kind of fundamentally, at some point, it broke. But architects were just...
It worked, but it was so slow that you couldn't get your head around it. So you had to choose two bad ways of doing something is not a fun choice.
And then the mental overhead of just remembering where those changes were made, because were they made here or there? Some were here, some were there. And I mean, it's actually not too different now in Revit when you don't have a power user behind, and they're making a decision to draw something with detail lines or put a dummy tag in just to get through the deadline.
To get through the drawings.
But then the technical debt you accrue so much of it, and you can't remember which way you hid that object or things like that, where like my wife struggles with this on a daily basis. And now she just goes to the forum and she says, is this even possible? And she often finds out, no, it's not even possible. Before, she used to go through step by step to try to figure it out to do it, and only to find out it wasn't possible at the end Now she's like, I just skip to the end.
Yeah.
Just go there. But we're still struggling with very similar problems over decades.
I can't imagine how difficult it will be for someone. If you're going to learn how to use a tool really well, you have to learn what it doesn't do.
Yeah.
And early on, Revit didn't do a lot of things.
Yeah.
There was no railing tool. You actually use the curtain wall tool to make railings, which even now has great flexibility.
Yeah.
I still use curtain walls for mezzanine levels because they contain space. And because you can slide those.
Because it's a wall. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a wall. And you can slide the balusters around because it's just a curtain wall. It's like sliding around a mullion. So it's like, actually, that was kind of flexible. But the challenge now is back then you could learn what Revit couldn't do very quickly. Now it would take a long time to learn what Revit doesn't do. So there's a lot of workarounds, but getting to the point where should I just work around this or should I try to figure it out?
I think coming up through the program, to lack of a better word, but it was all about the challenge of finding the workarounds and figuring out workarounds.
Yeah,
because
elegant.
we had to solve the problems. And so like I was going to school to learn how to solve problems, and I was doing it also just to get the software to do what I wanted it to do. And I think there are a lot of great examples of software that does exactly what you want it to do, and yet there are so many that still don't. Or there's programs like Revit that are 23 years old and there's a lot of cruft in there, or there's things they can't advance because there's other pieces holding it back. And navigating that world of the constant changes, but also still having to figure out those workarounds in a world that expects we don't need to have workarounds. Software is super powerful nowadays. There's just a battle going on there.
I think there's an artifact of creating software that is almost irrecoverable in that you're creating software to speed up an existing process, but then in doing so, the desire to create the thing that software allows changes, and now the software can't speed up the existing process. So in the case with Revit, if you're designing a fairly conventional building, it's kind of straightforward.
Yeah.
But then people aspire to not design conventional looking buildings, and now it's not straightforward.
Right.
So this was on the Trade Center rebuild, one of the design iterations had an external diagrid of stainless steel cabling. It was like a cable net structure. The structure ran up through the center of the building, and then there was an outer rigging out the top of the building, and then the cable net was suspended from that. And the cable net was a series of diagonal stainless steel bundles. Now, when you cut that in plan, your circular bundles are going to look like ellipsoids. And the documentation artifact was, if we were drawing this in plan, we would show those as circles.
Yeah.
And there was like this considerable discussion on how do we show circles in plan, because when we cut plans out of geometry, it's showing ellipsoids.
Shows what's really there, what's really happening.
So we were trying to create, I think Revit in a way, and Marty might back me up on this, Revit was a tool that was primarily designed to automate the documentation process.
Yeah.
It was also a modeling tool, but it was modeling in the service of creating documentation. And now I think the problem has moved on. It's gone from documentation and coordination to collaboration. And we haven't solved the collaboration part yet, because now the tools that you want to collaborate with, and Autodesk is making amends to figure this out, but you want to be able to use a Rhino model for your exterior. But then is it going to behave intelligently? You get the geometry, but you don't get the artifacts of space containment, and you have other challenges. And so, everything becomes a workaround. Now you're using a Rhino model for your exterior skin, but you have to cover everything in room separation lines in order to contain space. So, the problem moves on, but the software is always trying to catch up.
Yeah.
So it's constant workarounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This episode is made possible with support from Confluence. Picture this: October 2019, Lexington, Kentucky, the birthplace of Confluence, a place where tech leaders, AEC product developers, and practitioners came together for 3 transformative days. It was more than a conference. It was a confluence of ideas, discussions, and unforgettable social experiences. Since then, over 200 attendees have experienced the magic of Confluence. I've had the privilege of being part of 3 of these remarkable gatherings, 2 in Kentucky and 1 in Orange County, each one a melting pot of learning, collaboration, and camaraderie around a topic shaping our industry. And now we're thrilled to announce the next regional Confluence event in April 2024 in the vibrant heart of New York City. This time, we dive deep into the realms of AI and machine learning, unraveling their mysteries and potentials in our industry. Are you interested in being part of this exciting journey? To continue the conversation? To shape the future? Visit the link in the show notes for more details. Confluence, where ideas flow, connections form, and the future of AEC technology is shaped, one conversation at a time. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. So you left off with Autodesk. So what's happened since Autodesk, or how long were you there?
The kids were getting older, and I'm not exaggerating. The last 3 years at Autodesk, I couldn't figure out how to do something else at Autodesk. And I kind of poked different areas to kind of move into technical sales, to maybe move to another geo. And it was kind of like, I found later on through the back channels, it's like, no, hands off Phil. You can't have him. And so my stress was traveling 48 weeks a year. The last 3 years I was at Autodesk, which is amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
Getting to work with all of the firms I would have aspired to work for whilst in college, getting to work with them and not kind of for them, having the high level relationship, being plugged in with all the hypos at these firms, trying to solve difficult technical questions. It was heady days. But you come home Thursday night, and my oldest was probably about 9 or 10 at that point. It's really starting to stress him out. And I couldn't figure out how to make the transition to do something else, to stop traveling so much. So I no bridges burned. I resigned. I took an opportunity as an executive at a large A&E firm, and found myself in a world of stress, because now things start moving slow, and instead of managing technology, you have to start managing people. And I had no skill set for that. So that was probably, I don't know, I guess it was probably 2008. So maybe I was 43-ish, and realized I'd made probably a terrible decision, because I didn't know what the emotional cost of going into managing people was going to be like from managing technology, because I could happily stay up until the wee hours in a hotel room trying to nut out a technical problem and then go to sleep happy. But, managing people, and it was during the global financial crisis, and things were stressful. It was a large firm, but various offices were having to lay people off. And I just felt like I was getting paid a lot of money to not know how was I actually making the company money, just going from meeting to meeting. What was that like? So that was very stressful. And eventually, I think my job was eliminated. So I was kind of graciously let go. Some of the people I worked for, I still keep in touch with, but it was very, very stressful. Better part of almost probably 3 years.
Yeah.
Went into another startup, and that was kind of a mixed experience. But then by July 2013, what I saw at Autodesk, the thing that I couldn't nut out, Evan, was that, so Autodesk is a, multi-billion-dollar software company. They have a lot of mouths to feed. And the consulting group at that time, if I was going to come in and work in an office to kick a project off, and this is in the early 2000s, it was anywhere from $2,400 to $5,000 a day plus travel expenses. And so I would kick off 2 or 3 projects at a time. That was fine. But that's the edge condition of architecture firms that can afford that kind of overhead.
Right.
And I always thought, 90% of the firms are less than 10 people. They need expertise in the moment that they need it. But how do you distribute that? You can't get it on an airplane. It doesn't scale.
Yeah.
And so in July of 2013, I reached out to my nephew, who I taught Revit to when he was probably in middle school. And he graduated from Southern Poly, did his undergraduate degree in architecture and an undergraduate degree in computer science. And then he also got his MBA. And he was working at his own consulting practice. He's very entrepreneurial.
So he was a total slouch.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Slack ass. And I called him and said, do you want to go into business together? And his next words were, what took it so long? So we started a consulting practice with the intent of being a retainer-based service. So we're never going to work at risk. We're never going to chase money after the work's done. We're going to work with customers, set up retainers, and the moment they have a hard problem, we're going to help them solve it and charge in 15-minute increments. And that was July of 2013.
Wow.
We work with architecture firms that don't even know we're working on their projects because we're getting the information through the contractor. We're helping them solve building design problems. We don't do design, but we do a lot of coordination work for contractors who've now outsourced their BIM teams.
Yeah.
We do a lot of best practice. We do a lot of content creation. There are amazing firms of 1 and 2 people where the owner says, this light fixture is amazing. Can you guys get this in my project by Monday?
Yeah.
And we'll say, yeah, just put a placeholder in your project and send us a photo. And a photo in a Google image search will show you what that manufacturer is. And you might even get a cut sheet so you can build that piece of content with enough information to get them moving forward. We have an architect, he's FAIA in Asheville, North Carolina, and he might just call Adam and say, this dang curtain wall is making me crazy. And we'll go, Jeff, just sketch what you want, or can we jump on a web share? Show us what you want. Adam will get in the project and do the work and then get back out. I mean, we didn't exactly know how it would go in July 2013 because where Central Files lived was kind of ambiguous at the time.
Sure.
But now, the way that Autodesk has managed that, we can get access to a multitude of projects, get in on an as-need basis and get back out again.
So is this a baseline requirement? Is that it is a Revit-based project for you guys? No.
I mean, that's the one that I think the industry just will do whatever the contractor wants. The majority of use cases, it's Revit. Yeah. I don't think we have any other ArchIT or any other technology-based projects. But on the coordination side, for the most part, the contractor might have a requirement about what tool they like to use to solve their coordination issues and to track them, mitigate them, and we'll just use whatever they want. So that was July 2013, and we helped some large, interesting projects stay successful. And then I realized with the network, having worked for Revit and Autodesk, when I first heard about Enscape in July 2015, I thought, bullshit. Like, why would anyone make an easy button for rendering, not for architecture? If you had real time, you'd probably do it for the medical space or for some other industry with deeper pockets. And went home, downloaded it, was blown away. Like that, it wasn't the best rendering, but it was so fast and it was so transparent.
Yeah.
So I reached out to Thomas and Moritz, who are the founders at Enscape, and said, I know all the architects that will want to use this product.
Yeah.
And you guys don't understand the design workflow. You don't know how to use Revit. So let me take this around the world. And we set up it was a revenue share for selling the software on the condition that I would also support it, that I would help in marketing efforts, that I would help in, going to conferences. And so that, I guess what it evolved into was a go-to-market relationship.
Yeah.
That other companies have since approached us for as well. It's like, hey, we're making this technology. It's expensive for companies to go to market. And if you start hiring, if you want to hire someone who's a rainmaker at a big software company, like let's say you're going to hire someone from Autodesk who's a rainmaker and say, all the customers, help us go to market. You're going to give them a lot of equity, or you're going to give them a big salary, probably as much salary as your team of 3 or 4 people just for that one person.
Right.
And then, I'll get on a plane and fly coach to show customers a product. So they can't afford employees, but we will go to bat for a company and help them go to market in return for a revenue share and a very small percentage of equity, which protects us in the event of an acquisition. Because it's probably going to be a 5-year mission to help a company become profitable. And if they're acquired before profitability occurs, you don't recover your revenue investment. So we'll do it at risk.
Yeah.
And we know all the customers. I can pick up a phone and call these companies directly and probably won't get voicemail and say, I have something interesting. I'll be in Singapore in 2 weeks. Can I show you something? And so going to market, it's not we're not an equity partner where we just give companies money and let them spend it with guidance. We'll give them actual assistance. And that is, I'll write well, I'll create marketing stories, I'll create success stories.
Right.
I'll go to the customer, I'll go to the user groups. And for someone with a skill set like that, they probably couldn't afford them as an employee.
Yeah.
So that's why we do it at risk and do it with an equity stake. Because the equity stake helps, as I said, it helps recover the investment in the event of an acquisition. Otherwise, you're cashing out Apple stock to break even. and that's no good.
No. There's opportunity risk there.
Yeah. If you're going to do it to break even, you might not want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, do something else.
So this is an amazing story of this.
It's all accidental. Did we
Yeah, like
talk about that at the
yeah,
beginning?
yeah.
Okay, so stay curious. That's the hard part.
Why is that hard?
Well, in practical terms, what tends to happen is people get a job and then they borrow money to pay for things that they need, a house and a car and stuff. And then if they're good at it, they get elevated and get more money to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But if you're not careful and you keep borrowing money to buy things as you work your way up, you no longer can say no to things that aren't interesting, and you actually have to stop being curious.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because you can't afford to be curious.
Yeah.
You have to stay laser focused on the thing that pays the bills, that pays the borrowed money back. So you can't be curious.
Yeah.
It's a terrible trap.
So if you were advising a 20-something-year-old person today, I mean, that's a great message, but what beyond, like, if you were to lay a light agenda out in front of them about how to do that, because, and maybe this is the wrong audience to pick because they likely have debt already from going to school.
Well, but if they have kids that want to go and study architecture.
There you go. Okay. So because the value of staying curious means you get to choose what you want to do when you want to do it. You get to scratch that itch if everything is appropriate, right? You have the luxury of being able to do that. That is a luxurious position because I think it's the scarce position.
The luxury of being able to say no, Evan. Because when you say yes, you really, really, really have to focus. You have to say yes carefully.
Yeah.
For a young person, I would say start early college, learn to use your tools. If you aspire to become an architect or study architecture, go to early college, do your architectural technology course. It's like 2 years.
Yeah.
Graduate with no debt from high school, probably early, and start college studying something else, and then get a job part-time in an architecture firm so that you have enough time but not too much time free, right?
Yeah.
If too much free time, it's you end up getting into trouble. So so work for a firm, learn how to show up, and then after you graduate, go get your master's degree in architecture. And architecture school, the 5-year path, it's 5 years of, it's too much. They don't start, every design starts in a spreadsheet, and they don't teach that at architecture school. There's a budget, there's constraints, there's a site.
Yeah.
There's constraints. And knowing the metaphor for me is like, look in the fridge before you make dinner. You should probably know what your client's constraints are before you start designing. They're going to have a program. And that's a spreadsheet. It's not even a sketch.
Right. Absolutely.
So learning how to do that as early as possible sets you up for being able to say no. You don't have to borrow. If you haven't borrowed money when you graduate, you don't have to take the job with a company for the person that is maybe a terrible boss and the company that you don't like showing up for. You can go lean. When a student borrows $50,000-$60,000 a year for 5 years, that's an irrecoverable debt. You can never even pay off the interest.
Right.
And that kind of crazy money, I don't know that there's any job that you could work any job and not go to college and live at home, work in a coffee shop, $15 an hour, $30,000 a year, put as much away as you can. In 5 years, you graduate. In 5 years, you have $100K. Invest that money at the age of 22, 24. I don't know how you could do better borrowing money to go to architecture school and then having to pay $1,000 a month in interest for the rest of your life.
So when I think about architecture, capital A architecture, working in a firm, and how long it takes to work your way up a ladder, and how long it takes just to become a good architect, do you think a lot of that has to do with not doing what you just talked about? Because so, myself included, went into it at such a young age. You are learning by doing the whole time. And I don't even feel like I got licensed at 40. Right. I did not get licensed right out of school, which made it a lot harder to get licensed with 4 kids.
Right.
But at the same time, and this has been a conversation on my other ArchiSpeak podcast, right? My partner on that podcast also got licensed, I think, at 45. And it was just, we never felt ready. There was definitely like this thing in our brain that was saying, you're not good enough to be an architect yet.
Oh,
and
right.
because there's definitely a deliberate part of that in corporate architecture, which is like, just keep doing what you're doing, just keep chugging along, pay your dues, do all the things just like I did back in the day. But then there's this alternative that you just proposed, which was learn the business, then learn what the constraints are, and because most people don't do that, and I feel like this, because most people don't do that, we're in this situation.
So part of learning how to do something at university, and this was at seminary, this was at architecture school, which actually I thought architecture school would be more rigorous in terms of intellectual rigor. And they
It's
both have
hard
their
work rigor.
It's time-wise hard. Like by Monday, I want 3
Yes.
scale models, I want 9 drawings, I
Yeah.
want this many parties.
Yeah.
Seminary was more rigorous from a
Like a studying and
from a
learning.
paper writing standpoint.
Yeah.
We would have 50-page thought papers due at the end of semesters
Right.
and philosophy courses and things. And then when I got to architecture school, I thought, oh my gosh, this is like, this is going to be so much more rigorous. And we had 5-page thought papers due.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of technical drawing. There's technical things that you have to do, but
It was critical thinking, but manifested in different ways.
wasn't as
Drawings
hard.
and model making and
and
technical
bad drawings
ability.
with a good presentation, you probably would do better.
Learn how to be a good talker.
We had a project. So I was working for this engineering firm, learning the value of how you are helping the customer solve the problem in a way that gives them an interesting journey. Burton Engineering, Charlotte, North Carolina. I'll still have dinner with Carlton at Christmas this year, and I'll still tell him, no, you get next year, I'm getting this year. And we'll catch up. He taps me on the shoulder one day in South Park and says, I need that drawing for that project. And I said, what are you talking about? He rattled it off again. I said, you didn't ask me to do that. And he went, what? And I was like, oh, shit. He goes, okay, grab that roll of drawings, come with me. So I just grabbed a random roll of drawings and a roll of trace, and I'm following Carlton. We went all the way up to the top of the nation's bank building. And Carlton said something like, oh, you're going to love it. This is great. It was some site project. I don't know what he's doing. I opened the roll of drawings, and he's like, Phil, this isn't the right project. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And he goes, all right, look, anyway, here's what we're going to do. And he takes a roll of trace over the site plan. He starts sketching it up. And the client went, that's going to be great. Let's do that. And we walked out, and Carlton kind of punched me in the arm. He goes, there you go. And I learned in the moment, it's like, you can give the customer a polite experience. You can communicate them. The drawing is just the artifact
Yeah.
for the bureaucracy. But actually showing the customer what you're going to do and why is the journey. And that's what they want. They want to understand why you make certain decisions. And that's what he did.
Yeah.
And also being able to think on your feet, because you can't not show up. So you can't call the customer and say, oh, yeah, we forgot to do that. I'll see you next week, because you'll lose your client real fast.
One of my favorite people ever to work with was a lighting designer, John Lomelli. He's 85 now, 90 maybe. I mean, and this was not that long ago. He was probably 80 when he would do this, and he would show up in the office. He would open it. He always had his shoulder bag, and he would open it up, and he would pull out a blank stack of 10 pieces of 8.5 by 11, and he would pull out his little pencil case, and he'd have a couple of highlighters, like yellow pencils, and because he's a lighting designer, so he would always shade his drawings, and he'd pull out his lead holder, right, because he always drew with a lead holder. And the whole time we were having a conversation about the project and about the lighting, he was just sketching it right in front of you.
Right.
That was the communication. And why is he my favorite person to work with on a project? That's why. And it was just that experience for me as a professional. The client never even got to experience that. It was just me and him sitting at a conference room table,
Figuring it out.
And he was a lefty. And I just loved to watch him draw, and because he drew differently than I did. Being a lefty, he's always concerned about, smudging the pencil lead on the paper. And so he never drew in a notebook. It was always on these sheets. Why? Because he just slid them over at the end. He said, those are yours. And I have this stack of John Lomelli drawings that were
artifacts.
And it was just the thought process. It was the conversation. And I felt like those were gold.
Yeah, I think for the customer, it's an imposition to say this is the design. There's lots of ways you can do things, and if you just impose the design on them, they're going to go, well, why can't this go here? And why doesn't this go here? It's all product of function.
Well, then you have to explain it,
You have
like
to explain it. But if you take
everything.
them along on the journey at those key moments, I think it's more interesting for them. And ultimately, buildings are kind of like, buildings are commodity. But that journey, that experience, knowing why certain things are a certain way, why decisions were made, that's what the customer wants.
I agree. And I think it goes beyond the project at some point where the story that they have in their mind lives on because they get to tell it to other people that go into that space with them later on. And that becomes the story of that project after it leaves me and just goes to them. By creating those memories throughout the design process, they live on beyond handing over the keys, right? And people come into the lobby or they point at a thing. Hey, you know why that's like that? And to me, that's some of the most successful parts of architecture, and no one ever gets to see that. You actually have to continue to experience
why certain decisions were made along the way.
Yeah, and they get to tell that story, and they get to proliferate it beyond that time period that we had together. It continues to live beyond that. I love that about architecture.
I think if you're a young person and you start becoming exposed to that early on, it'll probably make architecture school more difficult later. You know, if you're too, if design becomes too much a product of function, if you get into your graduate program,
if you're
too, too
practical,
maybe too practical, and you might be frustrated by the first year grad students who are still making blobs and you're trying to make decisions,
right?
But the other thing is, small firms, you'll have to do everything.
Yeah.
I need you to update the web page. I need you to figure out why this network isn't responding. I need you to mix this animation.
Here. You gotta you gotta do it all.
But that puts you on a track of success you're not going to get that. I don't know, if you graduate from the regular program and you go to work for a firm that's a large firm, they have people that drive things. They have people that do post-production on renderings. There's people that do specific things.
Yeah.
And you're just not going to get Scott Adams, the guy that did Dilbert. He calls it a talent stack. There's a great book called Win Bigly. It's like how to fail at everything but still succeed. And the idea is that if you have a talent stack where you can do a lot of things pretty well, you'll have an advantage over all of the people that can do one thing really great. And so, accidentally going to seminary meant reading a lot of philosophy and reading a lot of ideas of how people are motivated. In the communications department, we were still mixing physical media, so it was videotape and audio tape. But then you learn this analog process that transfers to digital. So now I use Camtasia because it's a pretty easy tool when I have to mix video. But then nothing's unfamiliar. It's not a surprise. At seminary, you had to do a lot of dissertations. You had to do a lot of discussions, debates. So now, as much as I got out of seminary and said, I don't want to tell people how to live, that's way beyond me. But then you get in the software space and you realize, you're trying to convince people on why they should change behavior and live a certain way. Right. The irony doesn't escape.
Yeah,
but the psychology of why people want to change behavior and trying to find where's the critical mass and why this is better for you in terms of, like I wasn't sure if Revit as a company would survive. And the first big trip we took, it was probably either Singapore or it was probably Auckland, New Zealand. And there was a builder's show. This would have been early 2001. And everybody had their wares out. It was a builder construction software thing at the race course in Auckland. And, there was a row of people. I think ArchiCAD was there, probably Autodesk was there, a row of technologies. And 2 university students were looking at Revit. And I was just so happy and probably way naive about this whole industry and software space. I just wanted Revit to succeed. I didn't know Revit was going to get acquired. And now it's like, I wanted to use Revit at the time because why do I have to use AutoCAD? Why do I have to use MicroStation? I want to use the tool that I like. And now I hear people say, I have to use Revit.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't use
full
this other
circle.
thing. Yes, full circle.
Right.
And these 2 students were looking at Revit, and one said, why do we want to learn how to use this? When we graduate, people are going to pay us to use AutoCAD because they were still in school. And his associate said, if we learn how to use Revit, we can drink beer on Fridays.
Incentives.
And Evan, I thought, you know what? It's not about the architecture.
Yeah.
It's about the life afforded. Can you have a drink with an evening
Yeah.
with a friend after work? Can you have an interesting discussion? It really affords you an interesting life.
Yeah.
And so if you have tools that allow you the time to enjoy the things that you do with your tools, that's a pretty good gig. It's not about Revit. It's about the time that you have left over having used Revit or whatever tool it is.
I've talked with Roderick Bates at Enscape about just the idea of a rendering tool, which used to be post-production. Like that was what people got at the end of DD, to now using it as a decision-making tool in the design process. And
how crazy is that?
it's crazy. And to think about it from somebody who's lived through the various stages of technology, to say, we talked about this inclusion in the process from a client's perspective and the experience that they want out of that. A tool like that just brings joy to a client. When you can hand them the mouse, you can say it works like this, and then they can actually do it. They don't have to be a technical operator at the highest level to navigate their way through a project, or they don't have to just be the victim of a presentation either, right? They actually can drive it and look where they want. Is transformative. Is that something that you saw in a product like that early, or was it more of just like, wow, this is saving me a ton of time?
So I downloaded Enscape, opened it up, was blown away by its immediacy, right? So they say you can pick 2 or 3, fast, easy, and cheap.
Yeah.
Enscape was fast, it was inexpensive, it was easy to use, and the results were really compelling. So I think there's an artifact that occurs in architecture or maybe in art in general. At the point of performance, there has to be an emotional response.
Yeah.
And if you just show the client sheet music all the way,
They
and
don't
they
know how
keep
to read sheet
approving
music.
sheet music,
Yeah.
and then at the end you perform it, and they go, "Did I pay for this?" It's
Right.
like, "Oh no, I showed you the sheet music." So I showed Enscape to the youngest. Jasper was probably 14 at the time, and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I guess it's okay." I was like, "Are you kidding? Like, this is so
Don't
much
you know
better
where
than
we've been?"
rendering." And he said, "What's rendering?"
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that he'd grown up playing Minecraft.
Right.
There's this idea of stopping to do another thing. You just always experience it in 3D.
Yeah.
So here I am, in this little Revit sample project inside of Enscape.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me show you. Open up the render window, probably medium quality, hit the render button. And, the window goes black. And it says estimating time remaining. And after 10 seconds, he said, well, this sucks. Why are you doing it? And I said, this is rendering. And he goes like, why would anyone do this? And I said, because that's how you have to do it. And the idea of being able to see it concurrently, that was a kind of a very Revit thing. The idea that information in Revit was always concurrent. I could take something out of a schedule and it would come out of an elevation.
Yeah.
So with Enscape, rendering was for people that could model. Actually, rendering was for people that could render. It's highly specialized.
Yes.
And it was typically an artifact after you'd come through some milestones.
It was a completely separate channel of expertise.
Oh, it was a separate person, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the dysfunction or the disconnect I saw was that the client would sign off emotionally on plan sections and elevations. And then when you would take all of those and create an artifact, then at that point from all of these 2D drawings, you would do effectively projection, hand drafting to create a rendering. And they would go, I don't know. Whereas with Revit, you could show them at least a perspective right at the beginning, because the perspective was concurrent to the plan sections and elevations. With Enscape, you could show them a rendering from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And the emotional impact, even though the design at that stage is very lightweight geometrically, there's not a lot of detail, but there's an emotional impact with regard to lighting. Ambient light and artificial lighting, it's like key. And so I think what Enscape also did, and this is typically any technology that kind of becomes viral, is rendering tools are built for people that render. Enscape was designed for people that don't render.
Yes. Democratizes visualization to an operator.
So early on, there were a couple of large firms that I showed Enscape tool that came back with, we showed it to our Max team and we can't use it. It doesn't work with Max. And then I realized,
that's not the audience.
Yeah. So because I could also do marketing stories, I would seed Enscape in companies that I knew they competed with and then do a success story. And then I would get a phone call that said, you bastard, I need a quote for 10 seats.
Your workaround.
Because
back to workarounds.
The workaround is show your competition, because the rendering team, and maybe at first the rendering team is kind of threatened that this other democratizing tool comes along, but then they realize, oh my goodness, thank goodness I don't have to do all of these numbnut things.
I can work on more challenging things.
Yeah, because they're not going away. If you're
Absolutely.
doing big projects, if you're
They
doing,
get to work on better stuff.
you're the guy that's created the visualizations for the $1 billion football stadium,
Right.
and now you can focus on that and
Right.
not doing the
one-
renderings
yeah.
that I just need for today.
Yes.
So where I think it's going to get interesting is if Enscape had created another rendering tool for people that render, they will be fighting within an existing kind of market.
Yeah.
But they created a tool for people that don't render. However, it's for people that model. And what the transition, where the transition is occurring now, is there are rendering tools for people that don't even model. There's rendering tools that for people that can draw and describe.
Yeah.
And in the past, I don't think the transition is really that different. I call it AI. There's two kinds. There's the carbon-based AI, which is the architectural intern, and there's the silicon-based AI, which
I wanted
is
to
machine
talk
learning.
to you about this because you wrote a LinkedIn post about this. Is AI the next architectural intern? I think was the title
I
of
think
it.
it's part of it. I think
Yeah.
they'll use in conjunction. You know, the 2-hour-long conversation that you'd have with the design team and with the client to create a kind of visual pro forma and some design artifacts to get on a vector that's going to be worked on for 2 weeks. I'm seeing evidence of this. You know, the 2-hour conversation is distilled into a language model. It's a text description. And it doesn't create geometry, and probably for good, I don't want it to create geometry. Right. I want it to create an emotional metaphor.
Right.
And in some ways, actually, the way it deviates at times can create opportunities that you wouldn't have thought of. I don't know. Do you play any instruments?
Yeah.
You know, when
Guitar and bass.
Okay, so when you're noodling around on the guitar and all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh,
happy little accidents.
that is an amazing chord progression.
Yeah.
And it was an accident.
Yeah.
And so AI has this kind of flexibility of where it creates
Totally.
these accidents. So I don't know that I need geometry. I just need a metaphor.
Yeah.
But the AI is the silicon-based architectural intern. And I think Enscape will do a good job of addressing this. I think the Veris team, well, not Veris, what's the bigger company there with Bill and those guys?
Evolve Lab.
Yeah, Evolve.
Yeah.
I think they've done something so elegant because originally
Yeah.
Veris was for people that model. There was a plugin for SketchUp, Revit, Rhino. But with the web version, it's for people that just sketch
You can
and
just throw a
describe.
sketch in. Yeah.
And I've taken photos of gin bottles and coffee cups and gotten emotional feedback from that. That were, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that.
My son and I, there's one. I don't have a Veris license, but there's one called Viscom.ai, and it's very similar in that way, where it's like he has given me these very rudimentary drawings that he sorry, if he listened to this, he would not agree, but these very detailed, highly stylized drawings of like supercars and things like that, and I take a photo of it with my iPhone, I throw it into this interface, and he writes a description. And I've talked about this on recent episodes, just in that the pure joy that
Surprise me.
he experiences when that car shows up on the screen as a fully rendered, two-dimensional, granted, right, image.
Right.
I designed that, is what he says. Yeah. Mom, look, I designed this
When you
car.
look close, it's smudgy. But so is an early sketch. You haven't resolved all of that. There's smudginess. The smudginess is okay.
Totally. And to me, that excitement that I see in him, I wish I could have more people in our industry experience that on a day-to-day basis in the tools that they use. Professional tools. These are professional tools. This is the next generation of professional tools. And I think it's fun to watch because it reminds me of the first time I used whatever app that I experienced that with, right? Maybe it was Bryce 3D back in the day and generating a landscape, or some crazy Kai's Power Tools Photoshop plugin or something like that, where it was just like, you can bevel this text and have shiny highlights and all that stuff. Like that to me was just like, I loved that kind of stuff. Or the first time I blew something up in 3D Studio back in the day, right?
The AI renderings, if I had to model that or find someone who could model that, I think it's probably 2 weeks of full-time work to get to that level of emotional feedback.
Yeah.
And then it's a throwaway. It's like, okay, well, that's one, but I need about 20 of these.
Right.
So I was
That's 90% of the architectural design process.
You just want to get on vector with the client. Like, where are we? What do you like?
Yep.
If it's a commercial project, I think it's one level of an emotional response. But if it's where they're going to live, it's another level of emotional response. Like it's something that appeals to them at a subconscious level. And this engineering, it was an interiors firm, and they would talk with the customer, and then they would start to think in terms of metaphor of like, well, what kind of architect already works that way? And they would just do Google, Pinterest image searches based on this architect
Yes.
in order to then reiterate this in the context of this customer's project. And so we did we did an experiment. Basically, we were probably using Midjourney at the time, and the text description was referencing the kind of architects or the kinds of designers that would create. And they were like, well, this is better for us because we're getting something closer without having to do image searches that already exist. So I think from that standpoint, and the amount of set dressing that automatically occurs based on your text prompt,
Absolutely.
that's a lot of manual effort to put the flowers on the table in the right spot. Like all of these little things that you can emotionally respond to. Midjourney, I think Midjourney is a good one. That's the one I see getting used a lot. Stable Diffusion, but Veris seems to be a little viral. It's so approachable. It's for people that don't model. Just sketch, take a photograph, and it gets you on a vector. And then you're going to have to be deliberate about the next step. But that inflection point, I think it's already here. People are just going to expect that. And it's a faster way to search for images effectively. You know, you could look for images that do that. But
I agree. I
don't know how it's going to go away.
I don't either. Well, the toothpaste is out of the tube, as they say. It's not going back in.
So I would hire an intern that could take I'll still have a discussion. If I was an architect now, I would just hire an intern that could take a longer discussion and distill it into a text prompt.
The value of an architect at those early stages is about that experience, but it's also about curating a level of taste for a lot of, right? And to me, like that's what makes the difference between somebody who types in something they want to see the image generator generate versus actually curating the output and becoming really good at that. And I think that is probably the shift in the education of an intern who could then drive that technology is we're going to use this tool to drive and develop our taste with our client. And get good at that. Like actually get really good at getting stuff out of it that is what you're actually looking for, not just whatever the first response is based on a really simple prompt. But like this whole idea of prompt engineering, right? It's kind of a dumb name for something that's actually really necessary.
If you talk to someone for 2 hours about a project and then ask them, what did I just say? Give me a 1-minute synopsis. It's hard for some people to do that.
Oh, yeah.
But if you had someone who could distill a long conversation or take notes and then distill that note. I use Siri on the Mac to distill notes in order to create a text prompt. And I work and am personal friends with an architect in Charlotte, studied at State. Now he's gone into the construction space. He owns a contracting firm. But he does earnest design with a client before the architect gets involved. And then he'll do sketches. He'll get to the point. He'll take his sketches, put them into SketchUp, and then give it to someone else to do some renderings, and then get that back to the customer to get on a vector. And I said, let me show you this thing called Veris. I said, give me one of your sketches.
Yeah.
Describe this project
What's
to me.
the mood?
What's it going to be made of?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Right.
So via Siri, put that into a text prompt, and from my phone, created 4 renderings, and he was just blown away. He was like, and it actually did the thing where it didn't exactly do what the sketch imposed. It kind of deviated. Yeah. He's like, oh, I like this one. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, because there's that slider in there for like geometry retention, right? Like respect my geometry or not. Yep. And you can, I like how that is a metaphor for where are you in the design process. It's like
you can smudge.
Yeah, at the beginning, it's like no, like let's just go crazy, and then the farther along you get, it's like respect it some more, respect it more. No, respect mostly, right?
But at that point, he can take something that is on vector with the customer's fiscal and emotional response, and then begin in earnestness with I think way more confidence.
Right.
So, this guy's an architect who has his own construction firm, who designs with a client. Like that's a lot of value.
Yes.
That
early.
Hard, otherwise if you have to hire people to do each of these things.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a new game. right?
Yeah.
I feel like if you, knowing what you know now, we're going to start a firm. So we've given advice to the students about how to maybe plan their career. But if
Yeah.
you're going to give advice to someone who's interested in starting a
You're ready to
small
fire the firm that you work
boutique,
for
yes,
and go into business
because
yourself.
you are sick and tired of the way that they do things, and you're going to do it your way.
So the grass is going to look really green. You probably want to transition. You don't just want to, unless you get let go.
You're not going to cut it off.
You're not going to
You're
cut
going
it
to do
off.
these two. You're going to side hustle.
Yeah. You're going to do what Frank Wright did, right?
Yeah.
A couple of client projects on the side until you get fired
For
by
your
Lou
parents
Sullivan.
first. Yeah.
Yeah. That you're going to have to get to know yourself in some, I think you should subject yourself to some personality tests, because part of being in business is chasing the customer for money.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that artists, I
Are good at that.
don't know that they're good at that. Yeah. I think some artists are conflict avoidant. I don't think it's a coincidence there's so many acronym firms with 3 or 4 letters in them, because somebody was probably a great designer.
Someone's a project
Somebody's
manager.
probably managing the business, and someone's probably chasing the money. You should probably partner with somebody who's comfortable being half asshole sometimes, to like saying, I'm going to have to put a lock on your project until you pay me. That's part of it.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I was thinking I'm thinking the other part of that equation, which is like, wow, the tools are way different nowadays. If I was going to start something now, I would approach it very differently. But what you're talking about is actually way more fundamental to this, to the business.
It's like someone who will pick up the phone and go, you owe us money. Do I have to come by? Hey, let's chat. You owe us money. I need a check today. Because if you don't do that, you're cashing out your own funds to pay your staff.
Right.
A team of, I don't know that you need that many people. If you had, or one of the business partners, somebody who's happily chase the money and somebody who's happy to chase the customer to do the next project, and then maybe 1 or 2 technical people. But even now, you can almost hire them on demand. The technology allows you, imagine not having to kick the project off and then hand it to people to do the documentation. We will actually do work. We get designs from architects. They love the design process, but then getting it from that preliminary stage to starting construction documents or something that's late design development, where it's a really good, a really fit Revit model. They're just not good at that, doing it quickly and well. And so they'll hand us, in some cases, hand sketches or photographs of hand sketches with a scale.
Yeah.
And we'll mock that up in Revit, and then they get it back. So they're focused on getting the project secure with the customer, and then the last mile of design documentation and instructions based on what their local city or municipality requires from them. And the piece in the middle, which is get it to the point where I can start coordinating the design and find out where the gotchas are. Because we'll find lots of design problems in sketches where things don't align, and we don't change it. We just point them out and go, where would you like the core to go? Should we move the upstairs core over or move the downstairs core over? And we get to work with designers who do just extraordinary work, and their teams of 1 or 2. I think it's probably harder for the young people who, if they want to get to that stage of completion of being able to sign, seal, and deliver drawings, you almost have to go to work for a larger firm at that point, because they have the overhead to absorb your lack of return on investment early on, right? They're going to work with you to get to that 3 to 5 year period to where you're paying back the investment. Yeah, you could go to lunch and decide, I'm going to start a firm with someone, and you need a laptop and some software.
Yeah.
I don't know that you even need office space.
No.
If you have a customer who said, if you have a customer who goes, look, I love working with you guys. If you ever went out on your own, call me. You're probably golden at that point. The hard part that I've seen is a firm they'll get that first project, and then they start hiring people, and then it starts to get quiet, and there's a moral obligation with artists that, this person's starting a family and this person's trying to buy a house, and you have that these people have lives, and you can't just let them go, but you don't have another project coming in, and something comes in that you really don't care about that project
And you
type,
say yes.
but you say yes to keep everybody fed. And it'll never happen again. But then it happens again and again and again. And the next thing, you're doing site adapts for car dealerships or something that you don't
like
care
this,
about.
is what they say when the new person shows up. It's not normally, and
I
then
know
you find out it's
you don't like doing transportation hubs and warehouses, but we have this warehouse
it's
project.
always like this. Yeah.
Well, if you're only 1 or 2 people, 3 people, and you can stay lean between projects you don't care about, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because you've done really well with a few people, and you've got a bit of a fund set up to then go and find the next project that you care about. And now you've defined yourself by that kind of project, and you've done really exquisite work. And now the customers start finding you. They want to know who designed that. I want one of those.
It's interesting to me is the way
If you can wait and say no, that's the hard part.
the way you just wrapped that up completely aligns with the advice you gave earlier about how to make it so that you have that luxury later in life by not being in debt, right? Because these two things actually work really well together, but one does come before the other, right? You have to be set up to be in a position where you, again, have the ability to say no to things so that you can really do the things you care about with the ones that you say yes to.
Everyone below the king says yes. The king gets to say no. And if you don't want to be, man, if you got, simple things. We as artists and architects, we like to have nice things, but don't buy a new car, not out of college. As soon as you can stop renting, if it makes sense, as soon as you can not live in the big expensive city, but live on the outskirts where things aren't as expensive, it just gives you so much freedom and flexibility. As much money as you spend on the things that you like, buy the stock of the company that makes the thing that you like. So had you bought the $400 iPod when they first came out, and you bought $400 in Apple stock, if you spend $3,000 a year on Autodesk software, buy $3,000 a year in Autodesk stock. If you buy $3,000 in Adobe software, buy $3,000 in Adobe stock. And your portfolio of technologies that you use as tools to make things will become more valuable than the tool that you bought to make the thing. Like I think the example I like to give is mentioned this before, the $400 iPod. If you had $400 in effectively $400 in Apple stock in 2001, it would be worth well over $100,000 now. And that gives you a lot of ability to say no. You've got a buffer there.
Yeah.
So always, I don't think I've done well investing in technology markets, but the basic rule was buy things that I understand and buy things from companies that make products that I buy. So Autodesk, Apple, Adobe, Google, NVIDIA. If you buy computers with NVIDIA graphic cards because you like that computer, you probably want to go out and buy as much, your $2,000, $3,000 workstation, buy that much in NVIDIA stock.
I like that. It's a good rule of thumb, and could be easy to track that. It'd be hard to do, I think, for a lot of people. Like, it's basically doubling your spending every year, but if you're resourceful, that pays dividends.
It might be hard the first time, but if you haven't bought a new car, you got money left over. Yeah, I don't know.
Yep. I don't have a car with less than 150,000 miles on it because
the freedom of not having a car payment.
Oh, it's huge.
I shouldn't even talk about this because I'm on the cusp of buying a new car right now, which I've never bought a new car in, 20, 30 years, but I'm about to buy a new car. But I wouldn't, if you're going to buy the new iPhone, put $1,000 in Apple stock. Because what you're buying is it's kind of a consumable in a way. You're buying something that's going to run out of goodness in 3 to 5 years. But the company that makes it, it's an enormously useful ecosystem. And it's hard to compete with ecosystems. So that's why I like Autodesk. That's why I like Apple. That's why I like NVIDIA. NVIDIA has a huge ecosystem of developers that design things that run on their graphic cards. And it kind of took off with currency mining, and now it seems to be transitioning to language models and
right, with GPUs.
But I don't know who else has a better ecosystem. So if you just keep buying the thing, it's easy for artists to spend money on things that are consumables. So Autodesk, Adobe, NVIDIA, Google, Apple. If you put
Amazon
could be another one, particularly when you can't go out and shop, right? If you looked at those 4 or 5 companies and said, okay, just $1,000 in those companies 10 years ago, what it would be worth now.
Yeah.
And
but I think the thinking
that
now
gives you the freedom to say no and to be curious.
Yeah. The thinking now is, well, they're so expensive, they can't possibly do that again. And yet they do.
Are we going to go away from screens? Is technology going to continue to compress?
Media delivery.
Yeah, if screens go away, we have bigger problems. But I think the ability we have right now to find out information on demand has its pluses and minuses. I mean, it's a way to keep yourself anxious all the time if you keep scrolling through media and
Yes.
scrolling through news.
Right.
But if you need to find out something quickly and get an answer, a context-specific answer, it's trivial now. So I don't think that's going away. The
Right.
desire, if I want to know something quickly or at least get on a vector, and those companies seem to make tools that are ecosystems around finding out things quickly. Or I would put it this way, Evan, I invest in companies that make tools, not toys. So if I'm buying a thing to then use it to make something else, that's a tool.
Yeah.
It's not just something that's being consumed as a game or an
Interesting.
entertainment. But if I'm buying it to make a movie or if I'm buying it to make a building, yeah, then it's a tool. There's the other thing is, because architecture school, I don't even think professional practice, it's more about the bureaucracy of practice. It's not about like, how do you manage your personal finances? You need a good accountant. If you buy a phone for yourself as a private person and you save 10% of what you make, you have to make 10 grand to buy a phone for $1,000. If you buy a phone for yourself and you've got a side hustle as a designer, that's now an expense to the business. Why would you ever not have a business? Otherwise, things are too expensive. The mile that you drive to meet with a customer versus the mile you drive for your own use. You just want to be able to deduct those things properly. The laptop that you buy, all of those advantages. So if you're in business now, you probably want to have a side hustle.
And there's a certain amount of discipline that comes along with that to track those things so that you can legitimize all that at the end of the year, which is another area of overhead that some people are just not willing to do. I guess.
So architecture school should teach you to do that. Like if I have an expense, I take a photograph of it, I upload it to a Dropbox folder, and they stay in that folder until I put it in a spreadsheet, and then it goes into a different folder. So there's a way of tracking these, like just practical advice on, like, you don't have to buy expensive accounting software. You probably have, in my business, we use something called Harvest, which is a way of tracking time and expenses. And then we give it to an accountant. We don't try to become accountant. Adam has his MBA, and he's probably smart enough to know not to be the accountant. Yes. I mean, he's an accountant to the point, but then we give it to the tax person and let them take it over. They don't teach this at architecture school. Again, it's that focus on, when you go to school, you're thinking about it in terms of how will I use this as an employee versus how will I use this as an employer. And they don't want you to go fast at architecture school, right? It's every year you're there, you're going to spend more money. So I think in a way, university is incentivized to drag things out.
I feel like this whole idea of systematizing things to make it easy to do these tracking along the way is a key component. And this is what project managers do really well in architecture firms, right? It's like you take care of it right then. And a designer on the, like that mindset, in the quote unquote capital D designer world is like, it's messy, it's loose, we live in the chaos of it, and it's fine. And those are very different mindsets. As somebody who's doing this podcast as a business, when you talked about it's like, I have a Notion database, and I get the receipt, I take a picture of it, it goes right into the cell, and it's automatically calculating in the right category. Why? Because if I don't do it like that, I won't do it at all. It has to be.
But by doing it, you can forget about it.
Exactly.
It frees you up.
And this goes back to running digital practice in a firm where you're trying to convince the audience at large in the firm to do things systematically or based on a standard, and they see that as handcuffs. And it's like, no, it's freedom.
It's freeing you up.
It is freedom because you don't ever have to think about that again. You get to do better things. You get to do more important things, more valuable things.
If you have to delegate, you don't have to hire.
And if you accrue the debt along the way and then you have to do it all at the end,
oh no, it's too complex.
It's too big of a job, and you just won't do it.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Right.
So I think where the industry has gone now is a lot of specialists that can work together on demand. Team comes together. It's happened in the film and stage space.
Yes.
Where
because
major
of
motion picture or even better TV shows
Yeah.
now, they put teams together to do art direction, set design, set construction.
Right.
After the project, they go away.
Yeah.
They're not employees. And I can see architecture. It certainly happened in the construction space where they've stopped employing people that do things, and they hire them as subcontractors when the project comes together, and they get the people that play well together, and then they go away. But if you do good work, you come back together when the band's ready to play.
Yeah.
So that's where that's the process. If you want to start your own business now, you don't go and rent office space.
Yeah.
It's like 3-year lease.
Right.
No, forget
Nope.
that.
Nope.
Go lean.
Yeah.
And if the client has an office, you go there and you present the work.
This is a great place to pause because at this point in the conversation, we really needed a break. So we'll pick back up right here in the next episode for part 2. And remember, you can support what I'm doing here by subscribing to the show both on YouTube and in your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at trxl.co. Talk to you again soon.